So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Ken from Atlona to discuss the Opus Matrix switching line.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rick. Appreciate you having Atlona on today. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, I'm Ken Eagle, Senior Global Director of Training with Atlona, and want to spend the next half an hour or so talking a bit about our Opus Matrix series of switchers. And to go along with that conversation, talk a little bit about the HDR signal and how we process that and what additional considerations are needed when talking about routing HDR signals around your customer's home. So let's get into it a little bit here. Let me preface this by saying if you are currently not selling HDR to your customers, then you are missing the boat. You're behind the curve here. You are missing out on additional revenue that you could be selling to your customers, and you are missing out on providing your customers with the most premium video experience that they can have in their homes with HDR. So hopefully by the end of the session today, you'll be selling or wanting to sell HDR if you're not already selling that. And remember, HDR encompasses many facets. It's not just about distribution, which is what I'm going to talk about today, but be sure to reach out to your AllNet representatives and talk to them about all the other great HDR products, projectors, video displays, etc., that they sell that you're going to want to sell with your HDR systems. Your customers were destined for 4K just like they're destined for HDR. The Opus series switchers are compatible with all of the most popular HDR formats. I'll discuss those throughout the presentation today, but we'll include HDR10 at 60 Hertz, Dolby Vision at 30 Hertz, and you'll also be able to enjoy the benefits of HDR TV through broadcast service, which uses HLG, which stands for hybrid log gamma, as they continue to grow and emerge that format as well. Whole house audio is going to be a key component of any matrix system as well. And the Opus series includes audio embedding and de-embedding, plus breakaway switching that eliminates the need for separate audio matrix box. You'll also find numerous signal processing features, plus a full complement of audio inputs and outputs, including both toss-leak and analog stereo audio with no outboard preamp necessary. And the next slide here, I will show you a detailed look at the back of the Opus switchers, and we'll go through those inputs and outputs as well. And of course, control. You got to have control to make effective use of any matrix system. With a control processor on the same network as an Opus matrix switcher, you'll not only be able to control the box, but you'll also be able to send IP or RS-232 control to all displays over your HD-Base-T network. A mainstay feature of Opus and many other Atlona products is IP to RS-232 control translation that's built in to the Opus switcher. You may also be familiar with our Pro 3 series of 4K matrix switchers. Atlona has had these out for the past 4 years or so. They've been very popular. I will also do a compare and contrast between the Opus and the Pro 3 so we can highlight some of the key differences between the two different chassis. Here's that close-up detail of the back I mentioned. Let me grab my pen here and highlight a couple of points on the back. Here, this happens to be the 810, which is an 8 input, 10 output model, but all of our Opus chassis will have the same feature set, just the number of inputs and outputs changes. And you can see here, we have HDMI inputs. These are 8 inputs. They are HDMI 2.0 inputs, which means they're capable of 18 gigabits of bandwidth. And on the output side, here you have 8 corresponding HD-Base-T outputs. So that's 8 in, 8 out, but I mentioned this was a 10 output switcher because in addition to those 8 HD-Base-T ports, you have an additional 2 more HDMI outputs right here, which can be mirrored or matrixed to match any zone in the chassis. These HD-Base-T outputs are all 100-meter outputs, which means they're capable of 330 feet. They are using the HD-Base-T Class A chipset, which means they're also capable of distributing Ethernet through those ports as well. Down here in the lower left, you'll see we've also got a series of Toslink audio inputs as well as analog audio inputs, because these chassis have independent audio matrixing built in, independent of the video matrix. So you have a separate audio matrix built into this OPUS switcher as well. And on the output side, you have corresponding 10 Toslink outputs and 10 analog audio outputs. These work simultaneously, so in fact you can use a mix of both of them. So all of the chassis will look similar to this. Let me do a quick comparison here between the Pro 3 series of matrix switchers and some of the differences with the OPUS series. You'll see here on the left-hand column, I've got the Pro 3 series resolution, 4K compatibility. The Pro 3 was 4K 60 Hertz with 420 chroma subsampling, or 4K 30 Hertz at 444 chroma subsampling. And with the OPUS series, we can actually do 4K 60 Hertz 444. So big increase in signal performance there. The Pro 3 series does not handle HDR. The OPUS handles HDR-10 at 60 Hertz, Dolby Vision at 30 Hertz, and hybrid log gamma at 60 Hertz. From an audio integration standpoint, you do have audio de-embedding and audio analog ports on the Pro 3. But with the OPUS, you have, as I mentioned, independent audio matrix switching, audio embedding and de-embedding, plus you have a TV return audio channel. So that means that each of your zones, you have an audio return path from that receiver back down to the matrix switch. So that's a huge key feature, particularly if you're using that TV as a source. For example, if maybe you're running Netflix off of a smart TV. And you've got audio and analog and Toslink audio ports available. All of the ports are the 100-meter feature set with the OPUS series, and you have Ethernet pass-through out all of those, which we did not have on the Pro 3 series. In terms of chassis, the Pro 3 we went up to a 16 by 20, where with the OPUS series we stop at the 8 by 10. That's about the max chassis size in a physical matrix before you start to think about the cost effectiveness of moving into an AV over IP matrix. And then there are some receivers, which I'll talk about on another slide. Just note, when you go to the OPUS series of matrix switchers, you do need a special OPUS receiver to go along with the OPUS matrix switches. Okay, there are the three chassis. The 8 by 10, which is 8 HD-based T outputs plus the 2 extra HDMI. The 6 by 8, which has the 2 extra HDMI, and the 4 by 6, which also has the 2 extra HDMI outputs. So there's 3 different chassis to choose from to get just the right fit with the OPUS HDR output for your customer. Now, in terms of control drivers, as I mentioned, very important that you have the ability to control that matrix system for your customer. You will find that there are third-party drivers for OPUS in the way of Control 4, Elan, and URC. You have IR, IP, and RS-232 control. And don't forget, each of the OPUS matrix switches does that IP to RS-232 translation for you. So if you have an IP-based control system in the home, Control 4, Elan, or URC, the OPUS chassis will translate that in case your display, for example, is RS-232 on the other end, so you can talk directly to that, and the translation is done automatically for you. Makes installation quick and easy and very reliable. To get to these drivers, you just visit our website at atlona.com, go to the product that you're looking for, in this case, one of the 3 OPUS chassis, and then you'll see a series of tabs like I have here across the top of the page. I've highlighted here in orange the control drivers because I've clicked on that. And once you click on that tab, all of the control drivers will pop up right there, and you simply download those and you can begin to use them with your third-party devices. Now, on the receiver side, I did mention you do need a special receiver. That is called the OPUS RX. RX stands for the receiver unit. You see that's the first product on the chart here. This has 1 HDMI output. It's also capable of HDR-10, hybrid log gamma, and Dolby Vision at 30 Hertz. It does work with the 100-meter HD-based T extension, so you get the full distance of the Class A chipset. It does have the audio return channel, so we can send audio from this back down to the matrix chassis. It does have Ethernet pass-through, which allows your display to, number one, have Ethernet access in case you're not using Wi-Fi to do that, and number two, to pass IP control onto that display. You also have IPIR and RS-232 control available out of there. And beside that is the Juno 451 HDBaseT. Now what this is a small switching device local to the room. So let's say, for example, you've got a master bedroom where your customer has a couple of local devices, including some HDR capable devices that they would like to use just with that display in the master bedroom. But at the same time, they also want to take a feed from the matrix switch. This is a switch that allows for an HDBaseT input. You see that here, input number 1, and also 3 additional HDR local inputs that can feed in so you can switch locally right at that display. Let me show you a diagram of what that will look like here on the next slide. All right, here we have the diagram. I'm going to grab my pen again. Here in the center is the matrix switch. That's what's sit back at in my rack, my head-end unit. Notice I've got Ethernet connection out to my control system, and locally we have a few sources that feed directly into that matrix. One output, as an example here, feeding out to an OPUS RX, the standard receiver, connected to a display. And another output going to that Juno 451 HDBaseT switcher that we just talked about. Now this is, as I mentioned, in the master bedroom where we have a game console and a Blu-ray player, both featuring HDR locally that we want to use just with this display. They feed into this switch, while at the same time the matrix feeds into that switch, and now the homeowner can switch between their local sources as well as the matrix sources and be able to watch all that locally on that display. So that's a really unique and cool feature that comes with the OPUS system and allows you to process the HDR signal at the same time. Okay, so I spent a little time talking about the OPUS chassis, the features in those OPUS chassis. Now let's take a moment and just step back and talk about some of the bandwidth requirements that come along with 4K and HDR, and why it's so important to understand that, and why we need that special OPUS chassis to be able to route these signals. We'll start with 4K. You likely know a lot of this information already. Let me review here. 4K resolution is a signal that's 4,096 pixels horizontally by 2,160 pixels vertically. If we multiply those two numbers together, you'll see there's more than 8.8 million pixels of information on the screen. To get the aspect ratio of that 4K display, we would divide the horizontal resolution by the vertical resolution, and when we do that, you see you get a ratio that's 17:9, which means that the width is 1.9 times wider than the height. The challenge with that full 4K resolution is that 17:9 does not fit well onto a 16:9 display, which all of our customers have in their homes. In fact, you end up with these gray bars on the top and the bottom. So in order to correct for that, the industry created UHD or UltraHD, which is 16:9 or 1.78 times wider than the image is tall. It would have a resolution that's 3,840 pixels horizontally by 2,160 pixels vertically, which would give us a little more than 8.3 million pixels of information on the screen. Now to get that, what happens is 7% of the horizontal resolution of a true shot in 4K film is cut off to make it fit. Excuse me, to make it fit into that Ultra HD resolution, 16:9 aspect ratio. So how much bandwidth is needed to send 4K? That's 4 times as many pixels as we had in a 1080p image. And is our pixels the only thing you need to be concerned with when you are considering how much bandwidth is needed for 4K and HDR? The answer is no, pixels are not the only thing. What you really want to know is the bit rate. And to understand the bit rate, you really need to understand those number of pixels that you're sending, along with the sample color space that's being used, as well as the color bit depth that's being used, and the refresh rate or the frame rate of that signal that you're sending to your display. When you consider all these pieces together, what you get is a statement about your video signal, which is read like this: 4K at 60 Hertz, 420 chroma subsampling with 8-bit color depth requires 10 gigabits of bandwidth. That's a signal right there that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years associated with 4K. Very common, you're likely very familiar with that. To break that statement down a little bit, you see that 4K is the pixel count. 60 hertz refers to the picture refresh rate. That's the number of times we are refreshing each pixel on that screen per second. The higher that frame rate, the smoother the image we get. This is really ideal with fast motion, graphics, and sports. 420 refers to chroma subsampling, or how many pixels receive individual color information. Not all the pixels are always going to get color information. We limit the number of pixels that get color information so that we can preserve bandwidth. Obviously, we would love to give every pixel color information. That would be a 444 signal, but that's not always possible depending on the bandwidth that's available. The next piece there, 8-bit, refers to how many colors the individual pixels receive, right? 8-bit, 10-bit, 12-bit, the more color we pack into a pixel, the more bandwidth we need to send that color information as well. And the final number there, 10 gigabits, refers to how much bandwidth is needed to carry that load of information. Let me put it onto a chart here so that we can see where all these things stack up. The first little call out there refers to HDMI 1.4. This is the HDMI signal that we've seen over the past 8 years or so that has been used pretty heavily. We've installed a lot of this in customers' homes over the years. 8.4, HDMI 1.4, along with HD base T, both carry a maximum bandwidth of 10.2 gigabits. That means they're capable of carrying that 4K signal, but once we add HDR onto that 4K signal, you see that in the second call out there, we see that the bandwidth needs grow to over 11 gigabits and more depending on the type of HDR signal we're sending. So we have to change our transmission medium, and we have to now use products that are capable of having HDMI 2.0 ports. That's sources, it's displays, it's our transmission devices in between that make up our system architecture, all need to have HDMI 2.0 capability, which allows us to have 18 gigabits of bandwidth pass through. Now you'll see that on the OPUS switchers, I mentioned it earlier, those are HDMI 2.0 ports on there capable of 18 gigabits. There is still a bottleneck though, and that is with the HD base T ports, because HD base T is still limited to 10.2 gigabits. So the OPUS switchers actually do employ a type of compression called display stream compression. They take that signal in via the HDMI 2.0 ports. They do a light compression to compress that HDR signal to just under 10.2 gigabits, and we send that out over those HD base T ports to the OPUS receivers, which uncompress the signal and then display it on the screen. Now, it's a very, very efficient compression algorithm, which means there will be no visible degradation to the picture quality or change in latency due to the compression. If you were to run it side by side with a non-compressed image, you would not be able to detect any difference by the human eye. It looks truly amazing, and your customer gets that full HDR signal out the other side. Now let me put up a chart here and talk a little bit about the signal type and how much bandwidth is required. Let me start with a common one here. Let me grab the pen again here. We'll look right here in the middle. 4K UHD signal, that's 60 hertz with 420 color compression, 10-bit of color depth. This is a very nice picture. And you can see right here, all the way down to the end, we add HDR into it, a wide color gamut, and this will require just over 11 gigabits of bandwidth. So immediately, as soon as we begin to add HDR into that, we can see on that signal type, we need to have that elevated level of bandwidth or a system that can handle it. And that's when we move to that HDR or that OPUS chassis to be able to transmit that signal. Move down a little further, 4K 60 hertz 420, we will upgrade now to 12-bit color. And look what happens. We end up over 13 gigabits of bandwidth needed to send that signal. And when we change the color compression codec, now we go to 422 at 12-bit. Look at this, 17.8, almost a full 18 gigabit pipe is going to need to be used in order to send 12-bit 422 color signal. This is a great signal right here. If you can send this, this is an amazing HDR picture for your customer. You'll have a lot of customers who may ask you for the full 444 color compression algorithm. You can do that through the Opus. Just keep in mind, it will be at 8-bit of color, because 444 with 8-bit of color is also going to put us right at the maximum limit of that 18 gigabit pass that we have with HDMI 2.0. So is 444 the best solution for your customer? Not necessarily. 422 at 12-bit color may produce a better picture for that customer than going to 444 with only 8-bit of color depth. But keep in mind, at the end of the day, this all comes down to math. These numbers are not unique to Atlona. Every manufacturer on the planet is subject to the same laws of physics that we are. Just do the math. You can see exactly what signal is able to be transmitted and how you need to plan for that when building a system for your customer. All right, let's switch gears here a little bit now and talk some more about that HDR signal, why it's so important to your customer and what they can expect in their home. So what is an HDR signal? If you're new to HDR, HDR content on HDR compatible TVs can get both brighter and darker at the same time and show more shades of gray in between. Similarly, they can produce deeper and more vivid reds, greens, and blues and show more shades in between. Simply put, more contrast, more color, a more eye-popping picture that your customers are going to love. I mentioned contrast. It's very important. It's also called dynamic range. Why is that so important? Well, if we take a look at the 4 key elements that your eye needs to make or to see, perceive a great picture, you'll see they're made up of contrast, color gamut, color accuracy, and resolution. You'll see that contrast is by far and away the most important key feature to the human eye. What that means is changes in contrast, in other words, the changes between the darkest dark and the brightest white that your display can create, will be noticed by the human eye quicker and easier than any other changes in that display. So that's why contrast is very important, having a good contrast level. Followed by contrast, you have color gamut, the available amount of colors that are available to the human eye in that picture. Third, color accuracy, things like greens and blues, skin tones, sky shade. And then finally, at the bottom of that pyramid, you see resolution, which is important, but it's the least important of the 4. In other words, changes in resolution will be less noticed by the human eye than these other factors that we see on the screen here as well. So contrast is the most important, followed by color. Color volume is very important, and in an HDR system, you do need to have a display that's capable of wide color gamut. If you've been in the industry for a while, you're probably familiar with the chart that's on the screen here. Back when high def came out, the industry really pushed products that would handle the Rec 709 color space. You see that's the small inner triangle that's on the chart right here. As the technology grew, digital cinema came out with the DCI triangle, which expanded that color gamut, and all the way up to HDR, which is taking into account the full 2020 Ultra Triangle, which is the largest triangle space you see in there. That combined with the elevated levels of contrast in both content and a specialized HDR display, you're really getting a volume of color in your HDR displays for your customer. So combined with contrast, you have this amazing amount of color, and you really create that experience for your customer that is HDR. And that's what your customers really will pay for, and it's where you can really stand out from your competitors by putting in a truly memorable video experience for your customers in their home. Now, how does HDR work? Remember, HDR is a multi-part system. It's not just one thing. First off, you must have a display that's capable of HDR. That means that display is capable of elevated levels of brightness and contrast. That display is capable of wide color gamut. And then you must also have a media player that can handle HDR content. And finally, you must have content that's encoded or created in an HDR way so that it has those elevated levels of color and contrast, and they're encoded into that signal. So it's a multi-part system. You have to have all these pieces in play, Keep in mind that there are several different types of HDR out there. Our industry is never really standardized on one. That's why we see things like the ultra premium HD signal. We see things like Dolby Vision. Don't be afraid of those. They have different feature sets. But point is, you want to match up the equipment with the right technology so that it works for your customer. One other thing you want to take note of is metadata. A very important piece to the HDR puzzle. Metadata is information that gets layered on top of the video signal that tells the HDR capable display how to best take advantage of the greater color and contrast range in that underlying video image. So when the display receives that signal, it reads the metadata and then relates that metadata to the screen pixel by pixel, telling it where to be brighter or darker across the screen. That's how we create that amazing HDR dynamic image. You will see there are a couple of different versions out there: static metadata, dynamic metadata, and static metadata is metadata that's consistent through the whole course of a film, for example. Dynamic metadata is metadata that can change from scene to scene throughout the picture. The three formats that the OPUS series supports that you'll see include the HDR10 signal. HDR10 will support up to 4,000 nits of peak brightness, and nits will be a rating you'll see on those HDR displays, and will support 10-bit color depth and everything in the Rec 2020 color space. A number of manufacturers have been coming out with HDR10 Plus. The OPUS will be able to support that as well if you have devices that are moving into the HDR10 Plus spec. Dolby Vision there in the center has been the gold standard, if you will, in HDR. It's been the one that produces the best HDR image because it supports up to 10,000 nits of peak brightness and the full 12-bit color depth and everything inside that 2020 color space that is supported through the OPUS chassis as well. And finally, hybrid log gamma, which is the format that will be used by your broadcast sources like DirecTV, Dish Network, Comcast, other cable providers. So your customers are going to want to have a device that's capable of hybrid log gamma as well, because they're going to want to take advantage of those HDR programs that are being broadcast over the network as well. And you have the ability to do that with the OPUS system. Finally, cables and connectors. Current high-speed HDMI cables will carry the HDR signal. Just remember the source device and the TV must be HDMI 2.0 and be able to transmit metadata. And if you have a receiver in the mix that does not support HDR, you can always take advantage of the Atlona Juno, which we talked about earlier with the matrix switcher, which will allow for local switching of HDR sources while de-embedding that audio, so you can still use that amplifier that's in the room, and you can de-embed the audio, route it to that amplifier, and use the Atlona Juno product for the localized switching. All right, so there's a little background on the HDR signal and why it's important to understand that. Let me share with you a couple of other products from Atlona that you'll want to be aware of that also support the HDR signal. First off, the Atlona OmniStream product, which is our AV over IP solution. So if you're getting into matrix systems that are bigger than the 8x10, you'll want to look at AV over IP. OmniStream is the product that does that and will also support all the HDR signal types. If you're in a matrix environment where you need HDMI in and HDMI out, you have the H2H series matrix switchers. That's the second two products here, and these support HDMI 2.0 obviously and HDR formats as well. And then we have a number of HDR extenders in both the 100 meter and the 70 meter. That's the Class A and the Class B HD-based chipsets for 230 or 328 feet of transmission distance. So you have a number of options there. And the Juno switchers, which I just talked about, for localized switching of those HDR sources. A few more products here. You have the HDR M2C in the upper left corner. This is a multi-channel to two-channel audio converter that also supports HDR. Down here in the lower right, you have a quad version of that. A number of dealers use multiple M2Cs on a home site often. And so we've combined those into a single chassis with one power supply to make for a nice, neat installation. And in terms of distribution amplifiers, you have the Rondo series. These support a single source out to multiple displays. For HDR, you have a 1 in 2 out, a 1 in 4 out, and it's not shown here, but we also have a 1 in 8 out version of that HDR distribution amplifier. And final product is the EDID emulator, which also supports HDR signals. Don't forget about that. That's been a key product. A lot of our dealers carry that on their truck to use for troubleshooting. An amazing, helpful product to have, and works on the HDR signal types as well. Now, let me just conclude by letting you know you have free access to Atlona Academy, which is our online education training portal. Simply jump out to atlona.com/training. You can sign up online for our classes. Everything I talked about in here, plus tons more information available out there. I will also be at CEDIA in Denver this year, although I don't have the room information with me right now. I will be offering 2 classes, a class on Wednesday and Thursday out there at CEDIA, which will focus more in depth on the OPUS series of switchers and the HDR signal type. So if you want some additional learning, you can join me out there at CEDIA to go through those classes. In addition, our online course syllabus, which you see on the screen here, has been expanded beyond our 100 and 200 level courses. We now offer 300, 400, and 500 levels of certification. So if you're looking to extend out into networking and AV over IP, there's some amazing advanced classes out there. They all carry CEDIA accreditation. So please feel free to join those. If you're just looking for quick access to a bunch of our free videos on how to use our products, you can find those on our YouTube channel. These are designed to operate on not only a computer, but on a mobile device. So if you're out there on a job site and just need to quickly pull up a video on a mobile phone, you can do that through our YouTube channel. Easy to get to those. All right, with that, let me turn it back over to Rick here. If you have any questions, you feel free to share those. Rick will pull them up, and I'd be happy to hang out for a few minutes and answer some of those questions for you.
Hey, Ken. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Hey,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you to go back a few slides where you had the matrix of the bandwidth of each signal type.
Yeah, let me go back to that here.
Since we work with so many key vendors on the display side.
You were looking at this one?
That is it. So here's something we can share for those who may not be aware of the signal types that are coming from different sources. So one of the best sources out there that a lot of people use as a reference is the UHD Blu-ray player. And that is 420 at 10-bit maximum. So it can do 24, 30, or 60 hertz frame rate, but it cannot do above 420 for chroma subsample, and it cannot do above 10-bit for bit depth. So just a heads up on that. So there are some Apple TV potential sources on Apple TV, like the Netflix and the Amazon Prime, that might go into 444 chroma subsample, but the bit depth is not. What's the bit depth on those, Ken? Do you know? Have you ever measured that?
No, I haven't actually, but I think you make a really good point here. A lot of people get confused and say, we want the best chroma subsampling, for example, 444, but at that point, you're only getting 8-bit depth of color. So what you're doing is sending a giant color palette to the display, but then only sampling a small bit of colors for your user to see. And it's really not the best way to handle it. You'd be better off to, have a 420 or 422 color compression and be able to send your customer 12-bit color depth. They're going to have a more enjoyable experience with that.
Absolutely. And so there's a little bit of confusion about that. And obviously, since the UHD Blu-ray format comes on a silver disc, it's limited to what the laser can pick up off that disc in real time. So that's one of the reasons why it's dumbed down to 420 as a standard. But anyway, I digress. I just posted on our Facebook channel for AllNet a picture of one of your slides, the pie chart.
Excellent.
With I happen to have a can of Coke sitting next to me, so I put it in the image. And our friend Jim Burns already piped in with the answer as to why I chose the Coke can to add in the image. So Coke can red, for those of you who don't know, Coke can red is beyond the ability for digital displays to resolve. So Jim said that the new the new the widest color palette does include Coke can red, but yeah, up until maybe just a few years ago, you couldn't reproduce Coke can red on any TV, no matter how much you spent. Even for those, the guys that had the Pioneer Kuro Elite or the fanciest flagship TVs, yeah, it's deep down in the 700 down there in the far
Yep.
right. Yeah,
Yep. You look at that. I mean, back in the Rex 709, looking at the Rex 709, even the DCI triangles didn't reach down there far enough to hit that red.
yeah,
You're right.
that's the red of the Coke can. So, all right, well, let's get back to some questions here. All right, so clarification on the ARC. So with ARC, obviously it'll work on the native HDMI outputs, the zone outputs. You said it also works on the OPUS RX and the 451 receivers over the
Yeah.
HD-based outputs?
Yep. That's exactly right. So they're both designed to work directly with the Opus switch. So just for audio, you can't send video back down the line, but you can send the audio back down. So that way, if you're taking audio out through the Opus chassis and maybe routing it locally to an amplifier or to a house audio system, you can easily pipe it into that.
Okay, and the follow-up question is, the ARC input, can it be de-embedded the same as a native input on one of the input channels for routing through the Phoenix outputs to the breakaway audio distribution?
Yes, it takes up one of the ports, but yes, absolutely.
Oh, that's a good note. Okay. Let me see. The 451 HDBaseT receiver, inputs 2, 3, 4, etc. cannot be backfed to the chassis. So it's strictly an audio return. Those inputs are for local switching only, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Those are just for local switching.
Okay. All right. We've got a question about drivers for various control systems. Specifically, we've got a question about where to find Crestron drivers. Are they in the library on the software for the various control platforms?
Yeah, if you go to the website, let me pull that page back up. Right now, I didn't circle it on this one. Whatever reason, I must have forgot to highlight that. The Crestron driver is right here on that same page. Also, the Savant driver is there as well.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
Okay,
let
so
me
Mike,
highlight
that
those.
should
Got
answer
my
your
pen
question.
since I whatever reason my bubble didn't highlight there.
Nice. We're working on the fly.
Sorry about that.
Adapt and overcome. So
Right.
the next question that comes up is Sonos integration. So, and I guess the same would be, we're now obviously distributing MusicCast nationally through the Snap AV portal as well as through all the AllNet locations. So MusicCast and Sonos, those can, for those who are using the Sonos Connect preamp, that obviously can go directly into the chassis. You want to go back a slide to maybe a back panel input
Yeah, I was
slide?
just looking for that one. Here it is.
Okay, so we can feed that into the TOSLink inputs or the analog inputs,
Yep,
and
that's
then
correct.
if we have a source that's routed through the Atlona that we want to backfeed into the Sonos, we can use one of the Phoenix outputs to go into the local input, and then it's available on all the Sonos speakers that aren't necessarily tied to the audio distribution system, and that'll
Yeah,
be on the
yeah.
Sonos net.
Yep, that's correct. You
Okay.
could do that.
The other, so are any of these TOSLinks outputs, or are all the outputs analog?
No, all of these, let me grab my highlighter here again. All
Yeah,
of these
I can't read the
crosslinks right
text here.
here are outputs. These are
Oh, they are
outputs.
outputs. Okay.
Yep. And then these ones here are the analog outputs, and they work simultaneously.
Oh, nice. Okay, but they're zoned, so
Yeah, but they're zoned.
yeah, so
And I don't think I mentioned it, but
TOSLink one and analog output one are the same signal always.
yeah, that's correct. And I
Okay,
think I forgot
nice.
to mention it earlier, but each of these zones will have a 5-band EQ and volume control on it as well. So you
Oh,
can
that's
adjust
great.
every zone's audio and EQ independently as well.
Well, that's a nice feature. Okay. All right, so the other question that came up was using, not using the Sonos Connects to input into the chassis, but using Sonos amps as outputs for local music distribution, in which case you would use the outputs that you just showed there above, or you could use the Toslink, and they make a little, like a dongle piece that'll allow you to use a Toslink input on the new Sonos amp. So that would be how that would be done. And question, the Toslink outputs, are they native in, native out? If it's multi-channel in, is it multi-channel out, or can you down mix through digital output as well?
No, that they don't have down mixing built into them. You would use the M2C if you wanted to do that. Also keep in mind with these additional 2 HDMI outputs on the side here, if you're not using these as a zone, these become 2 free outputs just for routing audio out of HDMI as well if you wanted to do that.
Okay, yeah, and the new Sonos amplifier has HDMI input, so it can
And
take
if
that
you,
input as well.
yep, and you could even route one of these out into an M2C if you wanted to, strip it from multi-channel to 2-channel and then route it into any system from there.
Okay, perfect. All right, so a question came up. Does Atlona have Phoenix to RCA pre-terminated cables, or are we basically chopping the heads off of cables and terminating them on the fly,
You, you'd be
manually dressing these racks?
Yeah, you'd be probably doing those on the fly. We used to offer those cables, and in fact, if you're placing an order, I would maybe ask and see if there's any of those left in inventory. It was an item that we had always offered in the past, but what happened was most dealers ended up just making their own, and so we didn't sell through a lot of them. So we quit carrying that as a SKU. But oftentimes you'll find a product like that. There's still a bunch of them left in the warehouse. So if you're placing an order, you might ask and see if we have those, but otherwise you'd be making them on your own.
Okay, and that's pretty common. In the past, I've worked with other vendors that used a lot of Phoenix terminals, and everyone just chopped RCAs and hand terminated
It
and dressed
seems
their
like
own racks.
it always happens that way. We make the cable and then everybody ends up doing it themselves. So uh, whatever works.
Okay, all right. Um, the next question, when do you have any formulas to show when it makes sense to migrate from Opus to HDMI over IP?
So we don't necessarily have a formula. It kind of comes down, I guess, to 2 things: the application, one, and second, the pricing. It's like with the Opus series, we stopped building it at the 8x10. We didn't go up to the 16x16 like we have in the Pro 3 series. That's because once we get over 8 inputs, 8 outputs, from a pricing standpoint, it starts to become more cost effective to go to an AV over IP solution. And what we found with their dealers, most people who wanted 16x16 chassis ended up having maybe, 12 to 16 displays, but still only had, 5 to 7 inputs. And so you're wasting all those inputs on a 16x16 chassis. So price is one way to determine when you should go to AV over IP. The other is in an asymmetrical system. Anytime you get to a difference in number of inputs and outputs, now you start to look at it and go, maybe I'm wasting money by buying the physical chassis at a certain point. And that's why with Opus we limited it to 8x10 because we knew over that it either becomes asymmetrical or price insensitive, and that's when you really want to go to AV over IP.
Okay, great answer. And I can also share, we've done quite a bit of these AV or HDMI over IP systems. If you have any distance issues where it's going to be greater than the distance of HD base T, that can be tackled through products like the AV over IP, because we can use stack switches and fiber, and we can get that signal anywhere really.
Yeah, excellent.
Nice. Okay. Next question. Are these outputs HDBaseT outputs compatible with other receivers aside from the OPUS RX and the 451?
No, they're not. They're in the case of the Opus, they're specific to the Opus and the RX and the 451 receiver. And the reason is because the OPUS chassis is applying that display stream compression to the HDR signal to allow us to send the HDR signal over the HDBaseT output, which limits to 10.2 gigabits. And that's why you need that special receiver, because it receives the compressed signal and re-expands it so you can send the full 18 gigabits onto the display. So you do need to have the OPUS receiver for it.
Okay, yeah, that's great information. Okay. Back to the audio side, it seems the clarification on which will be downmixed and which cannot be downmixed. Can you clarify that again? The inputs that come in via HDMI or Toslink that have multi-channel encoding, which outputs can downmix and output? Or you said, or I have to use the secondary of the M2C box? Can you
Yeah,
clarify on
so
that again?
yeah, the OPUS chassis itself does not do any down mixing. So whatever you send in, if you send multi-channel in, that's what it's going to output. If you send two channel in, that's what it's going to output. If you actually need to down mix a multi-channel to a two channel, you'd have to feed the signal out first to the M2C. Let me pull that product up here again. Out to one of these M2C devices right here to do the down mixing locally for that zone. So for example, let's say that with a matrix system, you had a theater, and in the theater, someone's watching the Blu-ray player and they're watching in 5-channel surround sound. And somebody in the master bedroom says at the same time, I also want to tune in and watch that same Blu-ray program. And in the master bedroom happens to be 2-channel. Well, what happened now is the Blu-ray player will go, hey, I have to send a signal to both a multi-channel and a 2-channel zone. So it will take and downgrade the output to 2-channel because it'll support the highest common audio format, which in this case is 2-channel. And so your theater is only going to receive a 2-channel signal. So to get around that, what you do is you'd have to place an M2C in that master bedroom zone, route the signal into the M2C. The M2C will do two things. It'll report back to the Blu-ray player that, hey, I'm really mimicking a 5-channel zone, so don't downgrade your signal. At the same time, it'll pass an actual 2-channel downmix signal to the master bedroom so it displays it properly. So it's kind of a key piece. It's just not a functionality that's built into the OPUS chassis. And the reason it's not built in is if we added the M2C functionality to all of the zones of an M2C chassis, it would significantly increase the price of that product. And what happens is not all of our dealers need to down mix. So we offer it as an external piece. That way you can choose if you need it or if you don't need it. And if you have multiple zones, you could use something like the M2C quad down here in the lower right corner, so that you didn't have to buy 4 of those. You could just buy a 1 chassis unit if that makes it easier for you.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. So that sounds like the use case that we described earlier with the Sonos amps. It sounds like we would do that.
Yes, exactly.
If that was required, if there was a dedicated theater zone also in the home. Okay, so the other question that comes up is if there's a dedicated theater room and there's one of the advanced codecs that's HDMI only, like the 7.1 lossless or like an Atmos, will the Toslink outputs also be able to do like one of the 5.1 codecs, or will it, because obviously there's no EDID on Toslink, or will it just not work?
No, it'll still work. It'll do full 7-channel. It'll do Dolby Atmos as well.
Okay, out of the Toslink?
Yes, it should be out of the Toslink as well.
Okay.
I can verify that just to make sure and get that information back to you, Rick, so you can share it, but it should be out
Okay.
of the Toslink as well.
Okay. I don't know why I thought the Toslink only did the 16-bit formats, like the old. No, I don't remember what they were called back then, but before DTS EX or DTS ES and Dolby EX. So anyway,
Yeah, I'll verify that for you
yeah,
and
we're going
report
back like
back.
15
Let you know.
years back when they decided to make codecs that were HDMI only. But all right, yeah, and that's kind of a minor thing. It sounds like that would be for zones that were going out to like a sound bar or something like that, or maybe didn't
Right.
have the sophisticated input to take an Atmos signal. Okay. Let me see. I think that's it. Oh, can you elaborate on the IP control to 232 conversion? Now, did you say that you can take IP control from something like URCMX Home Pro, which does not have serial control outputs, and you can convert that to serial control if the control passes through the Opus box?
Yes, that's correct. So it'll do IP to RS-232 translation, and then you can send that RS-232 control out to, I don't know, your display or projector, whatever the device might be.
Oh, that's nice. That's really handy.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's
Okay.
a huge advantage of the Opus over, competing products out there. It really saves a lot of time on the installation and makes it a lot easier on the installers who are doing the job out there.
Okay. Yeah, in the past we had to use like these little global cache boxes to do that type of thing, and now we don't have to do that.
Correct.
How does so how does the driver just communicates to the Atlona,
Yeah, and you have a web
or
viewing interface with the Atlona box, or you can use the AMS software, which is a free download from the Atlona website. And you
okay.
will just go in there and you have to identify the device you're using, the driver that's in there, and it'll set up and do the translation directly to it. We use actually global cache as well across a lot of our lines, even the AV over IP stuff. It's just built into the Opus box in this case.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the other stuff is great. We do a lot with it. Cool. Yeah, that's really handy to have that on board.
Yeah, it's a big selling feature. I mean, the audio matrix, the ability to do full Dolby Vision, HDR at 30 hertz over the Opus, and the ability to do IPRS 232 translation. It's a pretty solid product line. The Opus has been received very well by the residential market space.
Yeah, every time we do one of these presentations, it seems like I pick up on a couple of other features that are kind of like world beaters that I didn't
Yeah.
even realize were in the chassis, and I've probably done the training 3 times now.
Yeah, definitely. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't have the booth number yet, but we will have all the OPUS chassis in live demo format at our booth at CEDIA. So if you're going to be out at Denver this year, come by and check those out. And I will also be doing 2 training classes on this product. I think they're 90-minute courses that we have. So we're going to get deeper into depth into the HDR signal, into bandwidth, and into these chassis and how to be successful with the HDR format with your customers.
Okay. All right. So we're close to out of time, but we've got time. If anyone has any additional questions, please type them into the questions tab.
Let me go back to the end slide too. So in case you don't have a question off the top of your head, you can always reach me or anyone on my team by sending email to training@atlona.com. Additionally, if you have ideas for Atlona products, whether it's to the Opus or to other products in the line, you can always send email to our address ideas@atlona.com. That goes directly to the owner, who is the head of our engineering team, and he reviews all of those with the engineering team. So we would love to hear your ideas. Please feel free to share those.
Yeah, I love the Atlona story too. Ken, since we have a little bit of time left, one of the things I wanted you to elaborate on is right front and center in your slide there, the shield on that little character. The warranty and support for Atlona has been tremendous, and it's one of the reasons why we're really happy to continue to promote Atlona as a premier switching vendor and vendor of HDMI extenders, just because we get such good support and the warranty is so amazing. But
Yeah,
also, it's what you just said about how the ownership team is engineering driven. This isn't a lick and stick company. This is an engineering company that creates product. They don't just remarket product.
yeah, everything from Atlona is is designed by our engineers in California. So like I said, it's 2 brothers who own the company. One oversees our sales and marketing, the other oversees the engineering side of it. So they're definitely tied into everything this company does. And the 10-year warranty, at our 10-year anniversary, which the company's now been in business 17 years, but at the 10-year mark, we launched the 10-year warranty. And that's not just on a product, it's across our entire product line. So if you're buying a product from Atlona, it carries a 10-year warranty with advanced overnight replacement in the first year of that warranty. So we really want our dealers to know that we stand behind the product. And if you're out there on a job site or you get in a tough space, we've got your back. We want you to know that Atlona is there for you. And if you have a question or you have trouble or if you need help with a product, we want you to know you're supported. And you can reach out to our training or our tech support or our inside sales or our engineering staff anytime you need to.
Yeah, and we've had really good luck. We've got, each of our guys here at AllNet have our favorite contacts at Atlona. So we've all got really good contacts over there at Atlona. So if you've got an advanced application case and you're trying to figure it out and you want a second set of eyes on it, feel free to reach out to us. We will also loop in the Atlona team and let them help us properly spec these deals so that we don't have any surprises at the back end, particularly with some of the applications we just talked about earlier with audio return channel or the M2C boxes for de-embed and down mix. So we've got a pretty talented team both at AllNet and at Atlona, particularly at Atlona when it comes to application questions, these kind of deep dive application questions.
Yeah,
And they loop
and
them in, and it's free of charge, and they're very responsive. I've had proposal or the system designs turned around in less than 24 hours, sometimes within a couple hours.
yeah, and I would just add to that by saying, Rick, your team, the entire AllNet team, is one of our few distributors who have always committed to the Atlona Training Academy. Your company is certified. I know you guys have your entire staff goes through our training programs and are certified on all of our products. So we love having you guys selling our product, and we know that your team does a great job supporting our product and representing us out there. So any dealers calling into AllNet, you're certainly going to get access to the best distributor out there who knows our product really well, and as Rick mentioned, knows our inside team really well. So if they do need help, Atlona's here to back them up too.
Yeah, sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Exactly.
All right. Looks like we've hit all the questions on the questions tab. So Ken, I want to thank you for your time today, and I want to thank everyone who's on the call for sticking with us and sitting through our presentation today on Opus. If anyone has any questions or if anyone has any applications that they'd like to discuss, please feel free to reach out to the AllNet team or reach out to the Atlona team. We're happy to help, and we want to help you migrate some of your audio distribution and video distribution solutions away from something that you have a comfort level with that maybe doesn't offer the performance for the HDR switching, the higher level switching. So we've got robust audio switching and high resolution, high bandwidth video switching, totally seamless with robust control. So we're happy to help. We're happy to help you put those systems together and distribute like a very high quality solution for your customers.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you tuning
Right.
in today. Look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thanks, Ken. We're going to end the webinar now. Thank you, everyone, for attending with us.